Officer Gerald Jones had slapped women before. He'd gotten away with it every time. So when he raised his hand in that crowded courthouse hallway and struck Nancy Will across the face, hard enough that the crack echoed off the marble walls, he didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear, and whispered 6 words that would seal his fate. "Filthy animals don't argue with me." Nancy's designer briefcase hit the floor. Her credentials scattered across the polished tiles. But Gerald didn't look down. He never did. To him, she was just another black woman in the wrong place at the wrong time, someone who needed to be reminded of her station in his world. The security cameras captured everything. The violence, the slur, the way he straightened his uniform afterward like he'd just taken out the trash. 10 minutes later, Gerald walked into Courtroom 5B to testify in the corruption case that would define his 15-year career. He adjusted his tie. He nodded at his fellow officers in the gallery. He prepared to deliver a performance of his life. The heroic cop protecting his community from dangerous elements. Then he looked up at the bench. The gavel was in her hand, the black robes draped perfectly over her shoulders. And Nancy Will's eyes, cold, calculating, and absolutely merciless, were locked directly on him. Gerald's mouth went dry. His vision tunneled. Because in that single, soul-destroying moment, he understood. He hadn't just assaulted a random woman in a courthouse hallway. He had struck the presiding judge in his own federal corruption trial on camera in front of 47 witnesses. His career wasn't over. His freedom was. This is a story of how one man's unchecked racism and violent arrogance collided with the very system he thought protected him. It's about Nancy Will, a woman who spent 6 months working undercover with the FBI to expose a precinct's culture of brutality, and how she became both victim and ultimate authority in the most satisfying case of judicial karma ever documented. But to understand how Gerald Jones went from badge-wearing bully to federal inmate in less than 48 hours, we need to rewind to that morning, to the courthouse steps, to the moment when Gerald saw a well-dressed black woman carry an expensive briefcase and decided she was suspicious, to the moment when his 15-year reign of terror met the one person who had the power, the evidence, and the absolute authority to end it, because Nancy wasn't just any lawyer. She wasn't just any judge. She was a federal judge assigned to dismantle the very culture of corruption that created men like Gerald Jones. And he had just handed her the final piece of evidence she needed, on camera, in public, with his own hands. This is the story of 60 seconds that destroyed a career, exposed a conspiracy, and proved that sometimes, just sometimes, karma wears a black robe and carries a gavel. Let's go back to where it all began. Gerald Jones spotted her from across the courthouse plaza at exactly 8:47 a.m. A black woman in a tailored charcoal suit, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than his monthly salary. She moved with purpose toward the federal building's west entrance, the one reserved for judges and senior prosecutors. That was his first problem with her. "Hey!" Gerald's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "You, stop right there." Nancy will pause mid-step, her hand already reaching for the security badge clipped inside her jacket. She'd been a federal prosecutor for 8 years before her appointment to the bench. She knew exactly what this was. She'd seen it 100 times in depositions, in complaint files, in the exhausted faces of victims who'd given up on justice. But knowing what it was didn't make her immune to it. "Officer, I didn't ask you to speak." Gerald closed the distance between them in 4 heavy strides, his hand already resting on his belt near his weapon. A power move. Intimidation 101. This entrance is for authorized personnel only. You trying to sneak in the back way? Nancy's jaw tightened, but her voice remained level. Professional. I am authorized personnel. If you'll just let me show you my... What did I just say about speaking? Gerald stepped closer, invading her space. using his 6'2" frame to loom over her. His partner, Officer Rodriguez, had stopped near the patrol car, watching but not intervening. The blue wall was already forming. "I've been working this courthouse for 15 years, sweetheart. I know everyone who belongs here, and you ain't one of them." Nancy reached slowly into her jacket pocket. "My credentials are right." The slap came so fast that nearby pigeons scattered from the courthouse steps. The crack of Gerald's palm against Nancy's face echoed off the marble columns like a gunshot. Her briefcase hit the ground. Papers exploded across the concrete. Her judicial credentials, the gold-embossed leather wallet that identified her as the Honorable Nancy J. Well, United States District Court judge, skidded 6 feet away and landed face down in a puddle. "You reach for something without permission again, and next time it won't be my hand." Gerald's face was inches from hers now, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that only she could hear. "I don't care what fake ID you bought online, ghetto rat. This is my building, my territory, and people like you." He smiled, cold, practiced, the smile of a man who'd done this before and never faced consequences. "You don't belong anywhere near a courthouse unless you're in handcuffs." Nancy's cheek burned. Her eyes watered, not from pain, but from pure rage that she forced down into someplace cold and patient. She looked past Gerald's shoulder at the security camera mounted above the west entrance. The red recording light blinked steadily. Then she looked at Gerald, and she smiled back. "We'll see about that, Officer Jones." Gerald Jones took the witness stand at 9:15 a.m. with the confidence of a man who testified in court 73 times without a single perjury charge. He placed his right hand on the Bible, recited the oath without stumbling over a single word, and settled into the wooden chair like it was a throne. This was his stage, his audience, and he perfected this performance over 15 years of making complaints disappear and victims shut up. The prosecutor, some eager kid fresh out of law school, started with the softball questions. Name, rank, years of service. Gerald answered each one with crisp authority, his voice projecting to the back of the gallery where a dozen uniformed officers sat in solidarity, his brothers in blue, the ones who understood that sometimes you had to bend the rules to keep the streets safe. "Officer Jones, can you describe the incident that occurred this morning at approximately 8:47 a.m. on the courthouse plaza?" Gerald cleared his throat and leaned forward slightly, engaging the jury with practiced eye contact. "Yes, sir. I was performing my routine security sweep of the federal building perimeter when I observed a suspicious individual attempting to gain unauthorized access through the west entrance, the entrance reserved for judicial staff and senior court personnel." He paused for effect, letting the word suspicious hang in the air like smoke. The individual in question was behaving erratically, moving quickly toward a restricted entrance, and appeared to be concealing something inside her jacket. Given the current threat level and recent concerns about courthouse security, I felt it was my duty to intercept and verify her credentials before she could compromise a secure area. The prosecutor nodded, scribbling notes. "And did you identify yourself as a law enforcement officer?" Immediately, I approached with my badge clearly visible and gave verbal commands for the individual to stop and identify herself. She became agitated and confrontational. Gerald's voice took on a tone of weary professionalism. The exhausted cop just trying to do his job against impossible odds. I've been in law enforcement long enough to recognize the signs of someone planning something. The expensive clothes, the fake confidence, the refusal to cooperate. It's a common tactic among individuals attempting to infiltrate secure facilities. Officer Rodriguez shifted in the gallery, nodding almost imperceptibly. Thompson, seated 2 rows back, had his arms crossed, his face set in an expression of solemn support. When the individual reached into her jacket without permission, I had to make a split-second decision to protect myself and secure the area. I used minimal necessary force to prevent what I reasonably believed could be a weapon retrieval. Gerald's eyes swept across the courtroom, landing briefly on each juror. My only concern was safety. My only goal was following proper security protocols. I was doing my job the way I was trained, the way 15 years of service has taught me to protect this courthouse and everyone in it. He sat back, shoulders squared, waiting for the praise that always came, the nods of understanding. The thank you for your service, that erased everything else. What he didn't see was Nancy Will, standing in the judge's private chamber behind the courtroom, watching every word through the closed-circuit monitor, her finger already dialing the FBI field office. Officer Miguel Rodriguez took the stand next, his uniform pressed so sharp it could cut glass. He'd been Gerald's partner for 6 years, long enough to know exactly what was expected of him, long enough to have learned that loyalty to the badge meant loyalty to the story, no matter what the truth looked like. Officer Rodriguez, you were present during the incident this morning. Can you corroborate Officer Jones's account? Miguel didn't hesitate. Absolutely. I was approximately 20 feet away, securing our patrol vehicle, when I observed the individual acting in a manner consistent with Officer Jones's testimony. She was moving erratically, kept looking over her shoulder, and when Gerald, Officer Jones, identified himself, she became immediately hostile and non-compliant. The prosecutor leaned against his table, casual, already knowing the answer. Did you witness Officer Jones use force? I witnessed Officer Jones employ minimal defensive tactics when the suspect reached into her jacket without authorization. His response was textbook, exactly what we're trained to do in potential threat situations. Miguel's voice carried the rehearsed rhythm of someone who'd said these words before, just with different names and dates. Officer Jones showed remarkable restraint. Actually, some officers might have drawn their weapons. He chose the least aggressive intervention possible. Miguel stepped down, and Officer David Thompson rose from the gallery. He hadn't even been on duty that morning, but he'd driven to the courthouse the moment Gerald called. That's what brothers did. They showed up. They backed the story. They made sure the blue wall held strong. Thompson settled into the witness chair with the easy confidence of a veteran who'd testified in 40 corruption hearings, without a single finding against him. He was the precinct's closer, the one they brought in when the story needed that extra layer of credibility. Officer Thompson, you worked with Officer Jones for how long? 12 years. He's one of the finest officers I've ever served with. Decorated, dedicated, absolutely committed to community safety. During a brief recess, the 3 officers gathered in the hallway outside Courtroom 5B. Gerald loosened his tie, grinning like a wolf who'd just escaped a trap. Textbook performance, gentlemen. That prosecutor didn't land a single punch. Rodriguez chuckled, shaking his head. Did you see her credentials scattered on the ground? Probably bought that fake judge ID off the same website that sold her that suit. It's always the same playbook with these people, Thompson added, his voice low enough that only his fellow officers could hear. Dress up nice, act important, cry racism when they get caught. Like we're supposed to just let anyone waltz into a federal building because they've got a briefcase and an attitude. Gerald checked his watch. Round 2 starts in 5 minutes. This will be wrapped up by lunch, and we can all grab beers and laugh about the Honorable Nancy, whoever the hell thinking she could play dress-up in our courthouse. They laughed. The easy, careless laughter of men who'd never faced real consequences. Men who'd testified their way out of complaints, lawsuits, and investigations for years. Men who genuinely believed the system existed to protect them, not the people they'd sworn to serve. Behind them, through the courtroom's heavy oak doors, the bailiff was making an announcement that would shatter that belief forever. The courtroom doors opened, and Nancy walked in without her briefcase, without her scattered papers, but with something far more dangerous. 15 years of prosecutorial experience and a photographic memory for case law. She'd refused a public defender. She'd refused to wait for her attorney. When the judge, a nervous-looking man named Harrison, who'd been appointed 3 months ago, asked if she wanted to postpone, Nancy simply said, "No, Your Honor, I'm ready to proceed." Gerald watched from the witness stand, barely suppressing a smirk. This was going to be entertaining. Watching her fumble through a defense without credentials, without evidence, without any idea how the legal system actually worked. He'd seen dozens of people represent themselves over the years. It always ended the same way. With handcuffs and a cell, Nancy approached the podium, her posture straight, her voice clear and unshaken despite the visible red mark still blooming across her left cheek. "Your Honor, before we proceed further, I need to invoke my rights under Brady v. Maryland, 373 U.S. 83, which requires the prosecution to preserve and disclose all exculpatory evidence. I'm formally requesting that all security footage from the courthouse plaza, specifically camera for position above the west entrance, be immediately preserved and sealed as evidence." Judge Harrison blinked. That wasn't the rambling confusion he'd expected. Granted. Bailiff, please ensure. Additionally, Nancy continued, her voice gaining momentum, I'm requesting preservation orders for Officer Jones's body camera footage, Officer Rodriguez's patrol vehicle dash cam, and any radio communications made between 8:45 and 9 a.m. this morning. Under the Supreme Court's ruling in Arizona versus Youngblood for 188 U.S. 51, the destruction of potentially exculpatory evidence constitutes a due process violation. Gerald's smirk faltered. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in the gallery. Furthermore, Your Honor, I'd like to cite Tennessee versus Garner for 171 U.S. 1, which establishes clear standards for the use of force by law enforcement officers. Officer Jones testified that he employed minimal necessary force against what he perceived as a threat. However, his own testimony contradicts the reasonable officer standard established in Graham versus Connor for 190 U.S. 386, which requires that force be objectively reasonable based on the totality of circumstances. Nancy turned to face Gerald directly, and her eyes were ice. Officer Jones claims I was reaching for something in my jacket, yet he also testified that my hands were visible, that I was carrying a briefcase, and that I was attempting to show identification. Your Honor, I'd like to submit that these contradictions, combined with Officer Jones's failure to examine the credentials that were scattered across the courthouse steps, suggest a pattern of conduct inconsistent with legitimate law enforcement activity. Judge Harrison leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "Ms. Will, you seem remarkably familiar with federal case law." Nancy smiled, thin, sharp, and absolutely terrifying. "I should hope so, Your Honor. I've been citing it professionally for the past 8 years. She reached into her remaining pocket and pulled out a single card. Not a fake ID, not something bought online. Her federal judicial credentials, laminated and official, with a holographic seal that caught the courtroom lights. Perhaps we should take a recess." The courtroom went silent, not the quiet of anticipation, but the vacuum-sealed silence that follows a detonation, the moment after the explosion when everyone's ears are ringing and their brains are still processing what just happened. Judge Harrison's face drained of color as he stared at the credentials Nancy held up, the gold federal eagle embossed on black leather, the holographic seal that couldn't be faked, couldn't be bought on any website, couldn't be anything other than what it was, official documentation from the United States District Court. Your Honor, Nancy's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. For the record, I am the Honorable Nancy J. Will, United States District Court Judge of the Northern District, appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate 8 months ago. I've been serving on the federal bench since March of this year, and I was on my way to my chambers this morning when Officer Jones intercepted me. She walked forward and handed the credentials to the bailiff, who carried them to Judge Harrison with trembling hands. Harrison examined them for 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Gerald Jones felt his intestines turn to ice water. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. He'd checked her. She was nobody, just another con artist trying to talk her way past security. The expensive suit was a costume. The confidence was an act. Except it wasn't. Except she was exactly who she said she was. Except he'd just committed assault against a federal judge on camera in front of a courthouse full of witnesses. Gerald's voice came out as a croak. Your Honor, she didn't show me. I couldn't have known. Officer Jones, you will not speak unless addressed. Judge Harrison's voice shook slightly, but he was already reaching for his gavel. His own career was probably flashing before his eyes, presiding over a case where a federal judge was a victim, and he let 3 officers perjure themselves on his watch. Nancy retrieved a second item from her pocket. Her judicial access card, the one that had fallen from her jacket during the assault, the one Gerald had stepped over, without bothering to look at, the one with her photograph, her name, her title, and a magnetic strip that would have granted her immediate access to any restricted area in the building. This is what I was attempting to show Officer Jones when he struck me, Nancy said, her voice steady and prosecutorial. This is the identification he claimed didn't exist. This is a credential he said was fake. And Your Honor, I'd like to note for the record that all of this, the assault, the false testimony, the coordinated perjury from Officers Rodriguez and Thompson, was captured on courthouse security cameras that are, as of 2 minutes ago, under federal preservation order. Judge Harrison's gavel came down like a guillotine blade. This court is an immediate recess. Bailiff, secure all evidence. Nobody leaves this building. And someone get the U.S. Marshals in here right now. Gerald Jones sat frozen in the witness chair, watching his entire life collapse in real time, finally understanding that he hadn't slapped a woman. He'd slapped a judge. And judges don't forget. The judge's private chamber behind Courtroom 5B was smaller than most people imagined. Just a modest room with oak paneling, a desk, a mirror, and a closet with black robes hung like silent sentinels of justice. Nancy was stood in front of that mirror now, alone for the first time since Gerald Jones's hand had connected with her face. She allowed herself 10 seconds. 10 seconds to let her hand shake. 10 seconds to feel the hot sting in her cheek, the rage in her chest, the exhaustion of being a black woman who'd done everything right, the degrees, the clerkships, the flawless record, and still ended up assaulted on courthouse steps by a man who saw her skin before he saw her credentials. 10 seconds. Then she exhaled, and the trembling stopped. Nancy unbuttoned her charcoal suit jacket. The expensive one Rodriguez had mocked, the one she'd saved for months to buy when she'd first made federal prosecutor. She folded it carefully and set it aside. The silk blouse came next, replaced by the simple black shirt that went under the robes. She wasn't Nancy Will, assault victim, anymore. She was stepping into something larger than herself, older than her pain, more powerful than Gerald Jones's 15 years of corruption. She lifted the judicial robe from its hanger. The fabric was heavy, substantial, lined with gold trim that caught the fluorescent light. This wasn't a costume, despite what Gerald had believed. This was armor. This was authority granted by the Constitution, confirmed by the Senate, and backed by the full weight of the federal judiciary. Nancy slipped her arms through the sleeves and felt the transformation complete itself. Her shoulders straightened, her jaw set. The woman who'd been struck in a courthouse hallway was still there. The anger, the humiliation, the justified rage. But she was contained now within something disciplined and deliberate, within the law itself. She adjusted the collar, centered the robe, and looked at herself in the mirror. The red mark on her cheek was still visible, and she made no attempt to cover it. Let them see it. Let every person in that courtroom understand exactly what Gerald Jones had done and to whom he'd done it. Nancy picked up the one item that completed the ensemble, her gavel, solid hardwood, perfectly balanced, with her initials engraved on the handle, a gift from her mentor when she'd been sworn in, accompanied by advice she'd never forgotten. The gavel isn't a weapon, Nancy. It's a reminder that in your courtroom, justice isn't about power or fear or who can shout the loudest. It's about the law, applied fairly without compromise. She gripped it now, feeling its weight, and thought about Gerald Jones sitting in that courtroom, probably still confident, probably still thinking his brothers in blue would protect him, probably still believing that his badge made him untouchable. Nancy will open the chamber door that led directly to the bench, the entrance reserved only for presiding judge, and step through into Courtroom 5B. It was time to teach Officer Gerald Jones what accountability looked like. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmuring courtroom like a knife through silk. All rise for the Honorable Judge Nancy J. Will presiding. The words hit Gerald Jones like a physical blow. His legs moved on autopilot, muscle memory forcing him to stand even as his brain short-circuited. This wasn't possible. This was a mistake. Someone was playing a sick joke. But then the chamber door opened, not the public entrance, but the private door behind a bench that only one person ever used, and Nancy Will emerged. She wasn't wearing the charcoal suit anymore. She was draped in black, judicial robes with gold trim that caught every light in the courtroom. The gavel was in her right hand. Her credentials weren't in her pocket. They were irrelevant now, because she was standing in the one place that required no further explanation, no further proof, no further defense. Nancy ascended to the bench with measured steps, each one echoing in the absolute silence. She sat, arranged her robes, and placed the gavel on the wood with a soft tap that sounded like thunder in Gerald's ears. Then she looked directly at him. Gerald's knees buckled. He grabbed the witness stand railing to keep from collapsing. The blood drained from his face, so fast he thought he might vomit. Rodriguez had gone statue still in the gallery, his mouth hanging open. Thompson looked like he'd seen a ghost, or worse, like he'd just watched his entire pension evaporate. Officer Jones, Nancy's voice was ice-wrapped in silk. You're still under oath. Do you understand that perjury in federal court carries a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison? Gerald's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His vocal cords had apparently abandoned him along with his career, his freedom, and any remaining shred of dignity. Let me rephrase. Do you understand that assaulting a federal judge is a felony under 18 U.S.C. Section 111, punishable by up to 20 years in federal prison? 20 years. The number detonated in Gerald's brain. 20 years. Not a suspension. Not a reprimand. Not a slap on the wrist from internal affairs that would disappear his file after 6 months. 20 years in federal prison, where former cops didn't exactly receive warm welcomes. Your Honor, Gerald's voice cracked. I didn't know. You have to understand, I was just doing my job. Your job. Nancy's eyes were black diamonds, hard and unforgiving. Your job was to strike a woman on courthouse property while calling her a ghetto rat. Your job was to prevent a federal judge from entering her own chambers. Your job was to lie under oath about suspicious behavior and security protocols when the only thing suspicious was your complete disregard for basic human dignity. She let the questions hang in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. Bailiff, please ensure that Officers Jones, Rodriguez, and Thompson remain in the building. U.S. Marshals are en route. Nancy's gavel came down with the finality of a coffin lid closing. This court recognizes that a federal investigation is now in effect. Officer Jones, you have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you exercise it. Gerald Jones finally understood what powerless felt like, and Nancy had only just begun.